Many of you know Giving Tuesday as the yearly celebration of generosity, kindness, and supporting others after Thanksgiving. But what if it was more? Now, every Tuesday, here on The Binge Factor, your host and podcasting expert, Tracy Hazzard, brings generosity to the forefront by sharing new and underappreciated podcast shows deserving of recognition. Pay it forward by giving your support to podcast hosts. Subscribe, offer a guest opportunity, and share these shows with others.
Hey there, Tracy Hazzard here, host of The Binge Factor. Unless you're new to the show, you know that I normally talk to top podcasters about how they create bingeable, successful shows, and I get them to share actionable tips on how to increase listeners, get engagement, get great guests, and produce a more professional show. But today, as a part of a new special feature called Giving Tuesday Podcast, hashtag Giving Tuesday Podcast, I'm going to devote my episode to shows you may not have heard of before. New and underappreciated podcasts you should be listening to, guesting on, learning from, and more importantly, sharing with others that haven't had a chance to get to that level of success where they become the teachers. So what is Giving Tuesday Podcasts? Giving Tuesday is traditionally the Tuesday after Thanksgiving here in the U.S. It's where we give back after consuming a lot of food and consuming a lot of products between Black Friday, Small Business Saturday, Cyber Monday. You know the drill. The idea for Giving Tuesday Podcast wasn't mine. It came from an interview with Brett DeHoot of the Hardest Word podcast. He's out of Australia, and he had a Giving Tuesday Now hashtag Australia version, and he did it in partnership with the UK partner Podcast Radio Network. So as a part of the campaign, podcasters can give other creators what they want more than anything else: publicity and new listeners. You know that's what you want. And so here, I've decided to make this a regular occurrence starting today, this Tuesday. So why am I doing this? I mean, it's a lot of work. I physically can't interview enough podcasters in my normal Binge Factor feature to help highlight great shows. I can't help everyone get visibility and publicity, and I can't be able to share where and why they are likely to be successful, and also share lessons to all of you aspiring podcasters and even some of the active and successful ones out there, where you might be able to learn some lessons from what's going on here and shift your show. So this way, we raise all the binge factor on all the shows and improve the listener experience in the process. So let me explain a little bit about how this is going to work. Shows are nominated and submitted. People reach out to me, like publicists, or my team comes across a show that they think is doing something really right. Then we review them for listenability and to make sure they're currently posting weekly, because consistent and constant is my mantra here. Then I personally listen to at least 3 episodes, usually the intro or trailer, one that catches my eye because of the title, the guest, or the topic, and then the most recent episode. Why? Because that's exactly the path that binge listeners follow, and so I'm going to do the same thing to check out the shows. And why do we care about binge listeners? For those of you who are new, I'm going to remind you it's because they will become your most active and engaged community, quoting your show, raving about it, sharing it, posting it, and more importantly, to those of you building shows with a business purpose, binge listeners become the ones who buy everything you have to sell and look for even more. So who do we have this week? Because it's actually Giving Tuesday 2020 as this episode airs, and I've chosen 5 podcast shows that have to do with giving and philanthropy. The 5 featured show today are the Giving Done Right podcast, Give, a Philanthropy podcast, Pro Bono Perspectives, Released Global, and Givers, Doers, and Thinkers. And as I introduce and review each of these shows, be listening for my mention of their binge factor, that special something that's an indicator that they have great promise as a good show, even if some of them are getting started, and some of them really are. I'm also going to suggest some things you might want to notice as you create your show, things not to do and things that you might want to emulate because they're serving this show well, and it might serve yours as well. Lastly, the most important thing, if you're going to take the time to build a podcast show with guests and featured companies, especially one that requires this much time, because I have to do all the research for all the different shows and put a lot of work into it and a lot of prep in it, then you want to make sure that you and the host and the new show are getting the best results from it. And you guys out there, the listeners, because we want to make sure that everyone's getting high value from what we're putting out there, that we don't just throw out the podcast and be done with it. So here's what we do with this, just so you understand how we're serving these podcasters, because we want to give to them. So we're not just giving by airing this episode, we're doing more. We tell them they were on the show by emailing them, and then emailing a reminder 7 days later in case they didn't get it. We entice them to share this feature by giving them a graphic with their binge factors so that they can share that like a testimonial. We give them all the code, links, images, and everything they need to put it on their website, press page, like social proof of a great show. This is really ideal if you just launched your show. We also tag them on social media, each separately and as a group feature together in the genre, using audiograms, quote graphics, videos, all the repurposed stuff that we create here at Podetize for our episodes. And then we do a follow-up feature article in Authority Magazine, or I do a follow-up feature article in Authority Magazine, and send a second set of graphics, shares, and links. And then if it's really good, I'm going to try and get them in BuzzFeed. That's my end game, is to try to get a mention in BuzzFeed, because you get your show mentioned in BuzzFeed and a lot of people see it. And now you've got more listeners. So if this sounds like a lot of work, this is why this is a gift, right? It's in the planning. But once you have the system set up, once you have the processes you're going to use, the residual value and sharing and listenership growth, I can't say that today, the residual value in growth is almost makes you feel a little bad, because you're receiving just as much as you're giving, but that's no reason to stop giving and serving. So how about we dive into our first podcast show featured this week? And that's the Giving Done Right podcast. The Giving Done Right podcast is sponsored by the Center for Effective Philanthropy. Hosts are Phil Buchanan and Grace Nicolette. They only have 7 episodes at the time that this is airing, so they are really just getting started. Giving Done Right is everything you need to know to make an impact with your charitable giving. If you're wondering, where should I give? How do I know which nonprofits are effective? How do I know if I'm really making a difference with my donation? Then this podcast puts you in the right place. Recently, my amazing sister-in-law, Laura Carton-Hazard, started a philanthropic fund called Cultivating Success Fund. I didn't understand exactly what it was. I mean, it took me a while to get it, that they're providing financial grants to nonprofit organizations across the country and trying to build strong support structures for families and individuals. And, this is amazing that she's building this fund. And she needs people who've walked the walk before. Giving Done Right is the right kind of place to find some of those guests, to find some people who have walked that walk so she can be more successful with her venture of what she'd like to do. She's the perfect binge listener for the show. As we listen to a clip, and I'm going to play a clip of the show shortly, I want you to listen for a couple of things. I want you to listen to the opening quote that they've created. Sometimes they call it an opening clip. It doesn't matter what you call it, but this type of opening quotation from one of the guests or something that's said on the show has a high production value if it's done right. But too often I find that the clip is taken out of context, and sometimes it confuses a listener, or it doesn't set the tone of what the real discussion is. It just was something soundbitey and catchy. So I want to caution you about the amount of work that if you're producing your show yourself, and they probably aren't because they have an organization, but if you are producing your show yourself, this is a lot of work you're creating for yourself, because it usually requires you to put in edit notes, re-listen to the show before you submit it for production. And if you're not, and you're leaving it up to somebody else, that's why we get these weird, irrelevant quotes and little teasers on the beginning that actually don't make sense when you listen to the whole episode. If you're a subject matter expert, in order to make an introduction quote clip have the impact that you want, you got to be picky about it, even if you're producing it yourself or if you're using a producer. Highlighted clips or quotes are a reflection on you, your choice of guest, and the message you're curating for your audience. So do not sub that out. The other thing I want to mention is the binge factor here, right? Because that's what we're all about here. So the Giving Done Right podcast, what's their binge factor? Well, first off, they have some nice intros and they go straight into the conversation. But more importantly, with their target audience, people like Lara trying to make an impact in the world, there's not enough knowledgeable and ethical podcasts out there. They're in the right place at the right time, helping people who want to make a difference, build better and stronger organizations. So whether your goal is to raise money to provide grants or deciding where your corporate or personal money should go, we all need a guide like the Giving Done Right podcast. So let's tune into the Giving Done Right podcast now and their episode called No Easy Answers, the hard work of giving done right, with their guest, Melinda Twan. And let's check it out.
So I would say this is why a lot of times people who come into philanthropy say, oh, it should be very straightforward and easy to measure my impact. And I keep saying it's really quite difficult.
Welcome to Giving Done Right, a podcast on everything you need to know to make an impact with your charitable giving. I'm Grace Nicolette.
And I'm Phil Buchanan.
Final episode, Phil.
Yeah, Grace, I'm excited about it. These have flown by, and I'm looking forward to our conversation today with Melinda Twan, who is an amazing leader in the world of philanthropy.
Yeah, time flies when we're having fun. We're thrilled today to talk to Melinda, who has been a trusted advisor to foundations and major individual donors around the country. And she's also managing director of the Fund for Shared Insight. Prior to starting her consulting practice in 2003, Melinda co-founded and ran Red F, a social venture capital fund, and was a manager at a national healthcare nonprofit and a management consultant.
And Melinda is somebody who knows philanthropy from so many different angles: nonprofit leader, advisor to individual donors, advisor to big national and international foundations. I don't know that there is someone with more deep expertise and knowledge about the challenge of giving than Melinda Twan. Welcome to the Giving Done Right podcast, Melinda. Great to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Melinda, I met you a long time ago when you were running an organization called Roberts Enterprise Development Fund, which was focused on helping at-risk youth. And at the time, I think you had helped pioneer a concept called social return on investment, or SROI. And the focus was on really understanding in some kind of quantified way the impact of your philanthropy. Do you think that's possible? And has your perspective on measuring impact changed over the years? Talk to us about that.
So Red F, which was called the Roberts Enterprise Development Fund, we were focused on providing employment through social enterprises, so nonprofit run small businesses for formerly homeless and low-income individuals. It wasn't just at-risk youth, but there were a fair number of homeless youth and at-risk youth that were employed through our enterprises. And I would say, our attempt to do social return on investment, or SROI, was really from the investor's perspective. It was really trying to make a justification in terms of what is the cost-benefit analysis of doing the social enterprise work.
So now for our second show, Give, a Philanthropy podcast. So first things first, when you type the word give into your podcast search, so if you're following along with me and you're going to your podcast player and you're trying to search for the show, don't just type the word give. It's a common problem with one-name shows or short shows. It doesn't show up because it's a pretty new show, so it doesn't really show up yet. You need to give and the word philanthropy in order for it to show up in the search engine. So this is a problem with certain titles, so be careful when you're titling your show, but I'm going to highlight that here because I want to make sure you don't miss out on checking out the show. This show is sponsored by Prodigy Marketing, and the Give podcast is hosted by Shannon Manganesian. She never pronounces her name on the show, so I probably just completely butchered it, but I couldn't find a place where she pronounces her last name. And in that intro, they don't say it. So you actually don't really know who you're talking to, except that she identifies herself as Shannon at some point. So anyway, I apologize, Shannon, if I messed up your name, but Give a Philanthropy podcast is what we're talking about today. It is for seasoned marketers using a show to promote their clients, target clients, and overall niche community. Give is a podcast who highlights foundations, nonprofits, thought leaders, people interested in philanthropy, bringing mission-driven impact stories, opportunities, and nonprofit marketing tips and tricks. Their perfect binge listener is nonprofit, public, private foundation managers and directors who are looking for a more personal connection and a higher trust factor in where to give for the general public side of it. So they're kind of matchmaking the two pieces. So bringing exposure to the nonprofits and the private foundations and matching them up with the general public and thought leaders in the philanthropy world so that they can get a higher trust factor for both parts about the foundation. So some things to listen to. The formal intro bumper on this episode is really informational. It's too long and slow for binge listeners. So if you hear it again and again and again, you'll understand if you go from one episode to the other. I didn't include that intro bumper onto this clip that I selected here. So you got to go and make sure you listen to the Give podcast to hear it for yourself. They're making some significant branding style choices that are hurting the bingeability and growth to their listener audience. We see this a lot when branding and marketing firms create shows or advise on creating shows. A few of those things are obvious to longtime listeners of the show. Things like episode art that looks the same, with titles and images that are overpowered by the branding, and episode titling that's all about the guest. In this case, they just have the guest organization name. That does nothing to tell me why I should listen to the show. And in some cases, like the clip I chose for you here, the name is not even descriptive of what the organization does or the type of organization. So these small tweaks in the links, graphics, and titling of your podcast episode takes a little extra podcasting know-how, planning, and time executing, but the result in website and listenership growth is exponential. The thing that they do really right here, though, their binge factor is choosing guests. It's one of the most critical care items to a bingeable podcast, and the Give Philanthropy podcast does this really well. It can be really tempting when you're interviewing clients or prospective clients to be too loose about who makes the cut, especially when you're starting your show and you just really want guests on there and they don't have an example of how great the show is going to be. But Give does not make that mistake here. They are very discerning about their guests. They present them and they present their story well, and they should be good at storytelling because that's the mission and services provided by their core company, Prodigy Marketing. Structuring interviews to show off how well Shannon can structure a story in impactful and compelling ways to engage more helps her and her company and her podcast shine. Let's give a listen to Give, a Philanthropy podcast, and an episode with a San Diego-based nonprofit called Fine Print Funding, and the founders Chantel and Justin Crompton.
And so she's actually living here now, and some of her siblings are living with her. And now it's really cool to see because some of her siblings are coming through our high school. And now their college is not even a question for them. So the hard work she did and fought through to make it a reality has now made it a reality for those younger siblings. And so they get to have the conversation of not, can I go to college, but where's a good fit for me? And to hear kids having that conversation and shifting mindsets is really what we're all about. That's the long-term vision, is shifting expectations in these communities that have never been known for academic success, have never been really revered for the incredible students that are in their communities. So it just sort of changes the whole dialogue for them.
So how can people support you guys? Obviously, donations are probably one of the biggest ways. They can go to your website, which is fineprintfunding.org, right? And just donate there.
Yes.
Seems like every dollar makes a difference. I mean, if you were able to support 60 lives plus the ripple effect that those lives have with just $55,000, it seems like, any amount of donation will make a significant difference.
5,500 actually. Yeah. I mean, this year, so we supported this year about 200 students, and that cost about $35,000 just to kind of put that in.
That's crazy. That's why I messed up the number, because that essentially, I'm not great with numbers. Everyone knows that, but that's about $100 per person, right? A little bit less than that, a little bit less than $100 per person. $100 will send one kid to a university. So everyone listening can donate $100.
Next up is Pro Bono Perspectives, a podcast sponsored by Common Impact. It is a podcast about the power of a purpose-driven career. So it's a little bit on the shift side. The Common Impact's a national nonprofit focused on creating successful skills-based volunteer programs that build the capacity of the nonprofit sector. So Common Impact CEO Danielle Hawley interviews everyday leaders from their network, working at both big companies and small nonprofits, using their skills to support their communities. It's meant to highlight those partners, learn about their personal and professional backgrounds, and explore what drives them to create positive change to inspire others to do the same. From my ear, the perfect binge listener is corporate employees leading community engagement programs, social giving companies like John Hancock, Fidelity, Marriott, Charles Schwab. So they're perfect binge listeners, probably commuting to work on a train, in a carpool, or a ride share. And now with remote working and less commuting, that's going to be harder and harder to get attention from these busy corporate managers and directors. And that's why success of this podcast relies on make that great guesting strategy, one that targets right to the heart of a network, similar positioned individuals, and create this fear of missing out from them, that they don't want to miss this show. So what are some things you should listen for as a podcaster with this show, Pro Bono Perspectives? So I'm sharing you the whole formal intro in a clip here, and unlike the way I didn't share it with the last one. This one, for most of you out there, is going to have way too much promotion for the organization. Putting this long an intro with this much promotional sort of framing of what their organization is usually a mistake. It's not a mistake here, and I'm going to explain why in a minute, but I want you to hear this, is that this is not a yes, you should do it strategy unless you fall into the world of what Pro Bono Perspectives is doing, which is why I'm highlighting it for you. Their guests are in really large corporations. And so their share of it with other employees in their corporation, their directors, people above them, those people might only listen to this one single episode because someone they know was featured as a guest. So you're going to have the episode listened by multiple people throughout an organization, but they might not turn into binge listeners because it's not a part of their job or it's not their perspective. So we do want to hit them with this intro that explains what the show's about, what the organization is doing, and why Pro Bono Perspectives is there. So that way they can refer it out to other people who it might be right for. You know, you can envision yourself as the next client, though, if this is a right fit for you, and that's what they're framing up. So key to this is selecting guests who work for companies with high name recognition. And that's a great strategy for social and business proof. The trick is to get the decision makers in similar corporations to listen at least once. That's where the FOMO comes in. So you want to make sure that you're sharing, and that when someone from Fidelity shares it, there's someone at a competing company who's going, oh, I wish that was me. So getting them to LinkedIn share is ideal here. One last thing I want to mention to those with a company or nonprofit sponsored show and a corporate site. So when you have a main website that is corporately based that you're putting your podcast on, you want to make sure that you don't leave any digital value on the table. Converting your already recorded podcast into a full-length blog post with graphics, like we do for our clients at Podetize, that yields high dividends in terms of organic traffic and compounding digital authority. This is of even greater value when your guests come from big corporations. Imagine the value of having a social post from Han Hancock, or a press page and executive profile on Fidelity Investments, linking back to your website and not to Apple Podcasts. So getting your blog consistently and constantly filled gives you extra time. You don't have to write, and it gives you a lot of authority and value to that core website for especially a corporate site. Converting the already recorded podcast into a full-length blog post with graphics yields high dividends in terms of organic traffic and compounding digital rank authority. So what's the binge factor here? So Common Impact and Danielle Hawley are strongly connected with leaders with high name recognition. The premise of Pro Bono Perspectives is a show that's going to talk about purpose-driven careers, and that's one that circumvents the usual PR block that can happen at those large or corporations. And while the show itself is not necessarily bingeable unless you're actively working in community engagement positions. Having a strategic core focus on purpose-driven careers encourages guests of Pro Bono Perspectives to share the show and gets the corporation they work for to share it too, which boosts impact for all. Let's listen to a clip from Pro Bono Perspectives with Danielle Hawley on what drives young people to act on social issues. It features guest Derek Feldman, Managing Director of Ad Council Edge and Influence.
You are tuning into Pro Bono Perspectives, live from Brooklyn, where the city never sleeps and purpose is more than just a buzzword. Pro Bono Perspectives brings together leaders that have traveled across sectors, industries, and experiences on their path to creating change for the communities in which they live and work. And I'm your host, Danielle Hawley, CEO of Common Impact, a national nonprofit that designs skills-based volunteer programs that amplify the impact of social change organizations by harnessing the talents and the skills of private sector employees. I am lucky enough to cross paths with these leaders every day through my work with Common Impact and can't wait to bring you behind the scenes to share their stories. Hi, everyone. Today I am joined by researcher and advisor Derek Feldman, who has more than 20 years of experience in social issue campaigns, movement building and marketing, and helping companies leverage their assets to create positive change. Derek right now is the managing director of Ad Council Edge, Influence SG, and its Cause and Social Influence Initiative. He is also the author of several books on social movements and actually has a new book coming out this July called The Corporate Social Mind. Today, we'll talk about the way different generations engage with social causes, how to tell when a company is authentically supporting a social cause and what's just good marketing. And he tells us what he thinks is in store for brand engagement in social issues in the context of COVID-19.
Continuing our Giving Tuesday podcast feature, we're going to feature a podcaster that I actually know. We're featuring Cami Boker. Cami is the host of Release Global and the head of the Global Education Philanthropists Foundation. And that is what produces the show Release Global. She's only about 12 episodes in, so she hasn't gotten that far. But the show features real life, firsthand human trafficking stories. It's spreading the awareness of one of the fastest growing crimes on the planet, and it inspires you to know more, do more, and save more. Cami is very passionate about this. I met her at an event, and she puts everybody into tears, and that's what already is happening on the show. The perfect binge listener already has an interest in learning more about combating human trafficking. And that's because you got to type that into the search engine to know that you want to go here. It's a place for you to dive a little deeper than the statistics and learn about the impact you can have with working with an organization. While it may be hard to find lots of listeners, the ones that find it and listen to the show are going to be eager to learn more. So this is a really good show with a great attractor for new donors and for keeping the ones you have engaged and supporting. I'm singling out Release Global for this tiny nitpicky technical syndication error, which is easily fixable because it has a large impact on getting your audience to find you and engage with you. And I want to make sure none of you are making this mistake as well. This is one of the most common show launch mistakes that podcasters make. Many make it because they're launching themselves and they don't have the technical know-how, but I've seen it happen with really good coaches and producers who make the same mistake. So in fact, all of the shows today, every single one that I featured had the exact same problem. The website link that shows on Apple, Spotify, or any podcast directory or app all points back to the podcast hosting service. In this case, it's sending Cami's hard-earned listeners back to Podbean and not to her core website, globalep.org. The other podcasters, they're all pointing to Libsyn. And what it's doing is it's stealing your authority But this can be fixed if you can find the spot where the link spot to your hosting account and change it. This also happens, by the way, on the episode links. So even if you fix it in the website links, you do have to fix it in the episode ones as well. Here at Podetize, we believe that a paid podcast hosting service should not steal your hard-earned audience traffic and digital authority by subverting your website and episode links. Podetize will never do that on my watch, and that's why I'm raising this to your awareness right now. We want all of you to capture your authority right back, no matter where you host your show. So if you notice that your podcast sends your listeners back to Libsyn or Podbean, I have a special gift for you. My partner Tom has recorded a tutorial video for you exactly how to switch it for both your show and for your episodes. So it's just a tutorial how-to, so you'll know exactly how to go in and fix it immediately. So all you have to do is go to the blog post for this episode at thebingefactor.com and get your authority right back. One more note on Release Global's show. They really need a way to play the podcast over their website and view episodes through their blog. I'm already talking to Cami about this, so this is not to belabor that topic with her, but I want you to see this because you really want people to share a single episode and be able to go back to your website. You don't want to have to share the entire show catalog or share a single show and only have them play in a podcast player. You want to drive them back to your organization's website. This is especially important for those of you who are nonprofit and foundations. How are you going to get them to join and donate or become your clients if you're not sending them back there in the first place? So this is critically important, and don't make the same mistake. Let's talk a little bit about her binge factor though, because it's there already, even though she's only a few episodes in. Release Global is a really personal show for Cami, and she's got a real personal mission, and it comes across in the story she chooses to sell, and sort of the sensitive, probing way she asks questions. This is what's going to make this show truly bingeable. Listeners are going to hear story after story and have no choice but to join her organization because you become emotionally invested the more episodes you listen to. The authenticity of how passionate and emotional Cami Boker gets as she shares these traumatic and inspiring stories is what makes it a must keep listening podcast. So I wanted you to check out Cami Boker's 8th episode on Release Global. It's called Amy Ellis, A Mother's Story of Her Domestically Trafficked Child. It is heartbreaking, and Amy Ellis is so generous with how she talks about this. I'm sharing a clip from you to show you just how passionate and emotional the host is, and her guests as well, and how that is translating to really attracting the right people to become sponsors for her programs and donors into her mission. So let's take a listen to Cami Boker's Release Global.
Released Global by Global Education Philanthropists founder Cami Boker. The Released Global podcast will expose riveting and emotional real-life stories. You will hear from trafficking survivors and their families, extraction teams, and others from our local and global community who want to educate their communities through real-life story sharing to find their own voice while releasing riveting facets of this worldwide monster. Now, Released Global host Cami Boker.
Welcome. Today I have a very special guest and a dear friend of mine who actually kind of changed my whole perspective and kind of changed the trajectory of what my organization does. When I met her, I realized she's just a powerhouse, and I never wanted another mom in the world to ever have to go through the horror that she went through. I'm going to cry just thinking of it. And so when she told me her story, I said, Amy, I will fight and make sure no other mom ever has to feel this way, even though I know it's still happening. So in 2017, Amy Ellis's life and her family's life changed forever. And so welcome to our show. I don't normally start crying. So welcome. It's been a day already, but welcome, Amy Ellis. And I'm going to let you share your story a little bit. But thank you for taking time to be with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. First of all, and don't start crying yet, Cam, because I don't need to start crying yet either.
covering giving philanthropy podcasts, covering that whole category today wouldn't be complete if I didn't talk about the podcast Givers, Doers, and Thinkers. It's sponsored by Philanthropy Daily, and it has the host Jeremy Beer. It's, again, a new one. It's 10 episodes in, but it's a spinoff from a bigger publication, so they've definitely got a lot of experience. Givers, Doers, and Thinkers, or GDT as they like to call themselves, introduce listeners to interesting people and important ideas at the heart of American civil society. They speak with philanthropists, foundation leaders, reformers, social entrepreneurs, nonprofit executives, religious believers, historians, sociologists, philosophers, journalists, and anyone else who can shed a light on contemporary civil society's achievements and failures. And they bring a little practical advice for nonprofit leaders and fundraisers as well. The show's really geared for anyone interested in that vital space where philanthropy and civil society intersect. It's a thought-provoking show, just like the name implies, and it's set for those looking to put philanthropy in context. So first, a few things to listen for as a podcaster. Like most new podcasts, this one has a rough start in terms of sound. The very first episode, the host has an echo in his environment, it's not using a proper microphone or something like that. I'm going to add a link to the blog post for this episode with a comprehensive review of microphones, just in case you have this problem as well, so that you know what we recommend here. But keep in mind that overpaying for a microphone can have a reverse effect and actually causes the sound to be worse. So be cautious there. But kudos to Jeremy Beer, though, because by episode 10, which is the one I'm going to share with you today, he got it all sorted out and his sound quality is really good. Listen to your own recordings for sound quality and make improvements. Binge listeners are really forgiving of sound growing pains as long as the content is good. Don't go scrapping your early recordings and redo them just to make them better as you go. Like, that's a mistake. Just move on and get better. Now, there are a couple of items I would recommend that they do fix on this show, and that's the title of the episodes. Get rid of the episode numbers. There's a couple of others in the list of ones that I've covered today, a couple of other shows that are doing this too. It's a waste of space for viewing the guest name and title because only so much shows on our little phone or on the scroll there. So take out the episode numbers. And without going into great detail on why, take it from someone who's recorded over 600 episodes on one of my shows. This is going to eventually cause high listener confusion and way more work for you later when you have to remove the numbers. So get rid of them now. Don't mention them on air. I mean, I guess your first episode's okay because that's always going to be the number one. It's sort of easy to figure that one out. But other than that, don't really mention that unless it's a specific episode on this is my 100th. Those are okay as well. The other recommendation I have for Givers, Doers, and Thinkers is to do a trailer or introduction episode. It can be set to be a pre-episode. Sometimes people call it the episode 0 or pre-episode, but it's before number 1. And sometimes it doesn't even play in the list. It's just hooking up as a trailer piece. And you can do that in Apple and some other podcast players. But the purpose of it is to be more of an intro on what to expect from the show. And it gives the show a host a chance, really, to properly set up why he or she is the host. This is must-have for attracting binge listeners. They love those trailer episodes. They love those intro ones. It gets them a tone for like, what am I going to really listen to before I get halfway through the show and find out it wasn't what I thought it was about. I have a particular process that I use with all my clients to get to a succinct and informative introduction episode. And I will link that episode. It's on another podcast, not on this particular one. And I will link that in the show notes for this blog post that is going to be at thebingefactor.com. So you can check that out. So if you don't have one and you want to create one, this is your guide to how to do that. I will share that with you. But this show is really important that it has one because there's an editorial staff at Philanthropy Daily, which is, the hosting this. And so they may want to, in the future, switch up the host of the show. They may want to use other editors. Things could change in the future. And this is a great way to do it, is to sort of set that tone up. And you can always change that out when you bring in a new host, and you can talk about the different editors in the process. So this is a really good way for them to get people to know what the show's about, get a great introduction to it, and then have a lead in to be able to make it more flexible in the future as well. You know, he did the first episode's really great, but it just dives right in, and you kind of need that prep. Why am I here if I've not been a Philanthropy Daily reader before? As to that, that's their binge factor, right? Philanthropy Daily is exactly the reason why they have a great binge factor, because they already have a unique focus. It's not served by other podcasts. It's not served by other publications in the philanthropy space. Givers, Doers, and Thinkers knows their audience and is interested in discussions about philanthropy integrated with civil society, and they deliver with informed guests and probing discussions. Because it's sponsored by Philanthropy Daily, they also have the credibility and experience of having curated content for quite some time to their target readership. They know who their readers are, and they know who they want their listeners to be. The connection with the publication is going to expand their reach really quickly, and this bodes well for a really successful and bingeable podcast in the future. So how about we take a listen to a clip from episode number 10, where he's interviewing Ben Soskis and talking about the untold history of philanthropy.
Leading thinkers about givers, Ben Soskis. Ben is a historian by training. I first became aware of his work thanks to a mutual friend sending me his dissertation while Ben was completing his PhD at an obscure school in New York City called Columbia University, in case you haven't heard of it. The dissertation was really eye-opening for me in laying out the critiques of philanthropy that had been leveled by a number of figures in the early 20th century or thereabouts. And we'll hear more about that today from Ben. I've been following his work ever since. Ben is now a research associate in the Center on Nonprofits and Philanthropy at the Urban Institute. He is also the co-founder and co-editor of a really cool website called HistPhil, as in History of Philanthropy. And he is the co-author of The Battle Hymn of the Republic, a biography of the song that marches on. And maybe we'll have a chance to talk about that a little bit today. Welcome, Ben.
Hey, great to be here.
Did I screw anything up in that introduction?
Yes, there's no way I'm the world's greatest living thinker.
You may be. I know you're being modest. It's not a huge club. I will admit that.
That's true.
Not many people do think about it, which is why I wanted to talk to you on this podcast.
I hope you all have enjoyed this brief exposure to some fabulous new podcasts and got some great tips in the process as well. As podcasters and passionate podcast listeners, I want to hear from you. Who should be featured next on the Giving Tuesday podcast? You can recommend any podcast you like. Just simply go to #GivingTuesdayPodcast form on thebingefactor.com to apply. You can pay it forward and nominate someone. You can also spread your recommendations via social media using the #GivingTuesdayPodcast and tagging @TheBingeFactor. To apply or find out more, just go to thebingefactor.com and go to the Giving Tuesday tab. If you're a podcast host and want to join in on the Giving too, I give some description on that page on what you might want to do to build it for yourself, and feel free to reach out to me. If you want to start a Giving Tuesday podcast feature, you don't have to feature 5 shows like I am. You could just feature one new one on Tuesdays. Whatever is best for you, that give back to your fellow podcasters and your sister podcasters out there. If you want to do that, there's more information about what I recommend on how to do that. I have really enjoyed preparing for and trying this new feature out on the show. I'm really hoping I can sustain this and do this more than once a month, but that's what I'm going to shoot for right now, is at least doing this once a month on the first Tuesday of the month. But I'm going to try and do it every Tuesday if I can. So I am looking for you guys to send me some great podcasts out there, because I can't do all the work of finding you. You've got to let me know who you are. I hope this is a great added feature to the Binge Factor. I'd love to hear from you longtime listeners, and let me know if this has been valuable for you as well. So as always, go to thebingefactor.com, tag me at The Binge Factor or Tracy Hazzard with 2 Z's, and find me anywhere on social media. Thanks everyone for listening. I really appreciate it, you, and I'm grateful and thankful for all of you.
You've been listening to the Binge Factor Podcast. For more information on podcasting and videocasting success tips and tactics, please go to thebingefactor.com. And be sure to listen to our other show for podcasters called Feed Your Brand. If you'd like to be interviewed on this show, as well as featured in Tracy's column, please go to thebingefactor.com/guest and apply.